Help! Anthony cried as superheated plumes of smoke caught in his throat. Fire engulfed his youthful frame. Flames flicked his skin, igniting the fair hair on his arms and torching his overalls. Instinctively, his body rolled, twisting over his cooked flesh. He wished only for the comforting arms of his mother, but would take one of the beams holding up the barn, falling and putting him out of his misery. The pain stopped. Anthony ran his hand along his arms. They felt fine. He held his arms close to his face, but only saw blackness. Anthony kicked a heavy mass on the ground next to him as he shifted, searching for light. A glow cascaded over Anthony's shoulder, illuminating the mass at his feet. It was charred black and about his size. Gross, right? A man in a three-piece suit said, leaning over Anthony's shoulder. He walked around to stand over the charred mass. His hair was slicked back and combed over. His skin was pale. It appeared to glow in the darkness. "Who are you?" Anthony's gaze followed the man as he walked through the darkness with just a plot of red dust surrounding the man's bare feet. The ground between him and the man hid beneath darkness. Anthony couldn't see his hands or feet, only the man glowing like a lantern in a dark tower. "Where am I?" "How many 8-year-old boys can say they've burned alive?" the man asked, kneeling down. He picked up a charred piece of flesh off the body and tossed it to Anthony. "That was your ear." Anthony let the ear fall in front of him or next to him. He couldn't tell. Once it left the man's hand, it vanished into the dark. "My ear?" he thought. "Of course, your ear." The man read his mind? Who was he? Anthony felt a mix of ease and terror creep into his joints. He turned and ran. The man stared after him. Anthony glanced over his shoulder and saw nothing. When he turned back, he ran into the man's chest. From the ground, he could see the red under the man's eyes. "Walk with me." "No," Anthony said. "I want my mom and dad." The man stared at Anthony. This boy appeared to be nothing of note. He sat on the brick-red rock of hell, crying about his parents. His overalls were big on him, and he wore no shirt beneath the straps. His boots kicked at the dust coating the ground. "I want my sister, and my house, and my bed," Anthony continued, pulling up one of his overall straps that had slid off his shoulder. "I don't want to be here. I don't like it here. God, please." The man's nose wrinkled. He walked past Anthony with an even gait. His suit flowed with his movement, bending without a ruffle. He said one word. "Follow." And Anthony obeyed. "Good boy. You've got a lot of questions, but I have very few answers. What I do have is a solution," he said. "All right. You may speak." "What is this place? I just want to go back to the barn." No. We've moved past the whimpering." "Solution to what?" Anthony asked. He felt shivers around his body and moisture in his eyes, but he wasn't able to connect their cause. He only knew to follow the man and ask about solutions. "Well, you're dead, and this doesn't look like heaven, so—" "I'm in hell?" "Huh. You aren't dumb. That's good," the man said. "Why am I here? How come I'm not with Lucy? I'm a good kid." The man's thin lips spread, revealing straight white teeth. His thin nose wrinkled. His vein-filled eyes widened. True. Why wasn't he above? How had a child so young fallen into his lap? "Exactly," he said. "Why would a little boy end up in hell? What did you do that is so terrible? I want to go home, Anthony said. His head dropped and his shoulders slouched. I can make that happen, but my price is a favor. I'm only 8. Right now. But you will grow, I guarantee it. I don't know, Anthony said, plopping on the ground. Remember where you are, Anthony Luther. If I say no more pouting, I mean it. Then let me go home. All I want is to go home. The man said nothing. He turned and walked away, darkness trailing in his wake. Anthony sat in the darkness. He wasn't alone. The sound of nails tapping on stone passed in the black. A long, muscular object crossed over his legs. Even at that proximity, Anthony couldn't see what it was. Only once the muscular undulation passed did he recoil, drawing his legs up to his chest, clutching at them as if they were a safety blanket. Howls of agony resonated around him before trailing off into whimpers. The light would return every so often, attached to the evil man. That became Anthony's day and night. When the man in the dark arrived, it was day, and Anthony prayed for night. Each time he prayed, the man in the dark stayed away longer. He returned once after 18 howls that lasted until Anthony was in tears. Will you accept my offer? The man in the dark whispered, his voice like a silk blanket warmed by fire. Anthony found the strength to refuse that time. Some time after, however, when the man in the dark returned, and Anthony's ears and nose began to bleed from extended exposure to the physical pressure of the howls, did he feel his resiliency wane. Each time the man in the dark returned, he would ask, Will you accept my offer? Anthony couldn't bring himself to do it. A favor could be anything, and he felt in his heart that this man was not a man, or simply even a demon. When he arrived, his ears throbbed more. After the prolonged screams, silence hurt worse. Anthony hoped the man would stay away forever, leave him to his sadness. But it was not to be. During the longest stretch between visits, Anthony thought he heard his sister howl. His parents were in the darkness, too. They asked him why he let this happen to them. Darker and lighter shadows danced in the blackness. Gruesome mutilations of his family played for him. An entire lifetime of family members disemboweled and decapitated in front of him before the man returned. He approached at first, just a dot on the horizon. Another round of painful howls began and ended before he arrived. Anthony gathered his tattered will to fend off the oncoming pain. As he grabbed at it, the ribbons slipped through his fingers. The fight left him. A small fire off in the distance. He doubled his efforts to make himself angry, to use hatred for his predicament against the scary man. Again, there was nothing there. Slowly, the man in the dark approached. The shadows receded around Anthony, revealing the effect of his isolation in the form of dried blood and cuts on his skin. What's your request? Anthony asked, dropping his gaze to the rocky ground beneath him. He'd given up. The man smiled. I see we've enjoyed our time in the bone cell. Anthony couldn't hold in the tears. He sniffled and looked up at the man. I offer you life, and you cry. Do you not want to hear my proposal? I don't know what that means. The man sighed in irritation. Patience was not one of his better qualities. You live your life like a normal kid. I don't want to have to search monasteries, churches, for you. In return, I require a favor. This favor is non-negotiable. The man sighed when Anthony looked at him sideways. It means you must do it. Anthony nodded and said, I don't believe you. Huh. I'll see you in another year. Wait, Anthony cried. I can keep my soul? If I wanted your soul, I'd already have it. Favors are more delicious. The man knelt down to be eye level with Anthony. What have you got to lose? Either you accept my bargain, or I keep your soul. I'm giving you your life back, Anthony. And my family? They don't concern me, the man said, extending a four-fingered hand. The ring finger on his left hand was severed at the knuckle. Anthony assumed the man was lying, but couldn't bring himself to care. If he said no, he would stay in hell. If he said yes, he'd be alive. The consequences were equally bad. At the moment, he thought of the cries of pain from his family as he sat there in darkness praying to be saved. He wanted his mother to hold him, his sister to tease him. He wanted to see his father again. He wanted to see the girl from the jungle gym with blonde hair and blue eyes. He closed his eyes and decided. Fine. I agree, Anthony said. He saw his father shake hands on numerous occasions to seal a deal. He reached out and gripped the man's hand. He couldn't begin to understand the ramifications of his choice. What kind of favor would it be asked of him? When? Where? Once asked, how would he accomplish it? These wouldn't be thought of until much later. The man in the dark simply looked at Anthony's hand, then back to his eyes. If you run, if you hide, if you try in any fashion to back out of our deal, I will come for you and your family. I understand, Anthony said, standing with his hand out, waiting for the being to grab it and shake. With a wave of his hand, a minibar appeared in front of the man in the dark. 2 glasses with ridges around its center held 2 ice cubes each. A single decanter with brown liquid sat between them. The man in the dark picked it up and filled the 2 glasses before handing one to Anthony. I'm too young. Drink, the man in the dark said. He held Anthony's gaze and grabbed Anthony's shoulder with his free hand, squeezing. Or no deal. Anthony closed his eyes and took a swig of the liquid. A burning sensation rose, not from his throat, but from his shoulder blade. In a moment, his entire body felt the fiery pain. That's the end of the prologue. On to Chapter 1's excerpt, titled Life After. Anthony raised his cupped hands of cold water to splash the bags under his eyes. He gripped the edges of the sink, hanging his head over the faucet. Water slid down his cheeks and off his lips. A single drop splashed on his crucifix, sliding down its edge. His eyes were bloodshot. The brown of his irises tinted the color of bricks. He tried to rub it away. After living with his nightmares for 10 years, his body grew accustomed to the fitful nights, the days in school where the hands of the clock moved backwards, and the falling asleep at practice. But the body needs sleep. It had been years since they were this prevalent. Each night, Anthony felt like he was pulled deeper into unconsciousness, and it was harder to wake the next day. Progress he made in therapy undone by a lawyer in a suit, a moonless night, the sight of the barn fire, and the most prevalent, the anniversary of Lucy's death. Splashing another handful of water onto his face, Anthony dried his hands in his brown hair. One of the 4 toothbrushes in the holder was missing. Patricia, Anthony's younger sister, took it with her to camp. His parents' brushes were wet, and the house was quiet. Anthony crossed himself against that silence. His lips touched the crucifix's smooth surface, brushing over the feather-like material. After waking, he felt eyes on him. He developed a twitch, looking over his shoulder, constantly checking every corner of the room he was in. He was unable to walk forwards without at least once spinning around to see if he could catch an imagined spy lurking behind him. He never did, unless you count the shadowy blurs nearly everyone sees as they spin around. It was manageable when others were around, and borderline hindrance when alone. He walked down the hall, his back against the wall, whipping his head back and forth as he did so. Once at his room, he darted inside. He closed his eyes and rested his head against the door. A Celtic knot shaped into a cross rattled against the back of the door just above his head. Early morning rays stabbed the darkness through his window, passing over a small ice rink-shaped nightlight. He would have to change the bulb in it shortly. It had been almost 2 weeks since he put that one in. Gold threads highlighted the green rope woven into the Celtic cross. It was one of many crosses in his room. Anthony touched it, first his fingers trailing down the wax edges. He touched each cross reverently, spending a few moments admiring their individuality. A plain wooden one he had made in shop, a metal one he found at the scrap yard, several luxurious ones with jewels and metal he bought at a yard sale. His ritual soothed the fears tearing at his sanity, reminding him he was safe. It was time-consuming, and not all understood his madness, but he found it hard to argue the results of his task. The largest cross in the corner of his room was the last of his talismans to be revered. Along its main body, scorch marks lingered. The wood splintered in spots, following hard wear marks across a once smooth surface. His stepfather told him he should throw it out when he complained of the nightmares, but Anthony couldn't. While its acrid smell still stung his nose, and the fragile coal remnants of a more solid structure crumbled under his touch, this cross was a reminder of survival. It was the basis for his whole collection, and he couldn't part with it. Anthony left his room feeling safer. He walked across the hallway to the stairs and headed to the kitchen. His shoulders stung, but not nearly as bad as in his dreams. It always lingered a short while after he woke.